digital technologies and digital realities, where we've been over the last 30 years and where we're going, some lessons from working with Nizar on Cairo, and some other projects too. I'm going to go pretty quickly, but before I dive into it, could I just have a show of hands? How many in the audience are architects? How many are engineers? How many have played Pokemon Go? A few. And how many have worn a virtual reality headset? A few, oh yeah. And how many have used a 3D scanner of some form? Great. So, how many are historians? Archaeologists? Physicists? Geophysicists? So, in a nutshell, I want to talk a little bit about where heritage has been with technology and where it's going. I'm going to start with World Heritage, then talk about physical and digital realities and where we've been. Briefly mention Virtual Cairo, although I think we've had such a great introduction from Nizar, I can skim through that quickly. And then talk about some of the opportunities and possibilities moving forward. So I spent a decade of my life working with UNESCO, applying technology to World Heritage, and I think it's a good introduction, especially because there's a very Egyptian piece to the story. So in 1872, the world's first national park was created in Yellowstone in the United States. Up until then, there had been parks, but they'd always been for the king, for the elite. They hadn't been for the common man. So 1872, remember that year. Then in 1945, in the aftermath of World War II, UNESCO was created to build peace through education and culture. So, since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. And then we moved to Egypt in 1959. And with the Aswan Dam, a huge international effort began, and UNESCO's first real major heritage conservation project. And from that effort in Egypt, in the 50s, a meeting was convened at the White House in 1965 with the idea of creating a World Heritage Trust, an international group to help use the lessons of those that had created parks and preserved areas to help the rest of the world. And that all came together in 1972, exactly 100 years after Yellowstone, with the creation of the World Heritage Convention, or Treaty. So we have a basis in history for why we want to conserve things and why it's important. The physical reality, though, is our past is quickly disappearing. I did a book a number of years ago about places in danger, but why? What are the dangers? Well, there are many. There's conflict and war, Afghanistan, and more recently, the tragedy at Palmyra. There are many developmental and man-made issues. This is a site in Peru where farming has raised the water table, and this adobe site is collapsing into the ground. Same thing is happening here. Outside Alexandria, we have a World Heritage Site that also is sinking away. Pollution in Beijing. Pollution at times becomes quite extreme. And this is affecting monuments and heritage. And I'm sure, I don't know the facts on Islamic Cairo, but I'm sure some of the same challenges happen here. Pollution in other forms on the Belize Barrier Reef, dumping by ships and boats. There are disasters. This is Mount Athos in Greece. The last of the original 13 monasteries was destroyed a number of years ago by a fire. Sometimes pollution comes in more insidious forms. This is the cave of Lascaux in France, called the Sistine Chapel of Prehistory by some. It's suffering a problem that's going on that's similar to what's happening at the pyramids. As people entered the cave, their breath and the humidity changed, and the cave is closed. It's been closed now for a good number of years, but even the limited number of environmental impacts caused, there you can see just in 7 years, these great prehistoric works of art slowly getting eaten away by fungus and bacteria. Disasters continue to happen without warning, floods. This is Prague, or for those that know Venice, you may not know that the waters are rising, and they have a set of walkways that they bring out regularly now, several times a month, because San Marcos Square floods and you can't get across it. In Peru, in Machu Picchu, everyone wants to visit. The road has been built up the side of the mountain, and landslides and other disasters happen. The river floods, and this sort of illegal settlement at the bottom of the mountain, this tourist settlement, has been wiped out. Lives have been lost, heritage lost. So if you're interested in the book, it's out of print. I've never done it in Arabic, so if anyone's interested, maybe we should collaborate. So physical reality of heritage, sort of at risk, the real challenges. Let's talk a little about the digital and what's happened over the last roughly 30 years. A lot has actually happened. In 1986, some of the first mobile phones came out. And today, they're vastly different and vastly more powerful. And this sort of device has enabled a whole revolution that I think has great potential for heritage and for those of you in the audience that are building the next generation of tools. 30 years ago, the GPS satellite system was sort of young and in its early stages. Devices were cumbersome and hard to use. I took a team to Peru, not even 30 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, and this is some of the equipment. We had to task a satellite to come overhead to give us real-time positioning on site. Today, again, the sensor chip in your phone gives you GPS positions down to several meters. More advanced devices with a faster processor can give you down to centimeter accuracy in real time. That wasn't possible 30, 40 years ago. 30 years ago, sensors to capture things in 3D were in their true infancy. I was involved in the creation of the company that made the first laser scanners, and this is the bench prototype, an optical bench in a laboratory of how to direct a laser beam to measure objects. Today, sensors with close to the same level of accuracy are available at a fraction of the cost. On the right there's an American quarter. This is the Intel RealSense sensor, which is shipping in the first mobile phones this month. But that's a 3D sensor that will be positioned next to the camera in the next generation of devices. Some of you may have heard this project called Google Tango. But they're putting 3D sensors in your phones. So with that, you'll be able to not quite laser scan, but 3D scan. At not the accuracy of a laser scanner, but be able to capture 3D real-time data of objects. And it's enabling all sorts of new games, because your Pokemon Go game you can now play and have Pokemon jumping off the desk, and your phone knows exactly where in 3D the desk is in relation to you. So in 30 years, sensors have grown by leaps and bounds. That's close to 30 years ago. It's a much younger version of me. And that's one of the first laser scanners. So you can see the amount of equipment and devices to power it. That same device today is an order of magnitude faster, several orders of magnitude faster, several orders of magnitude cheaper, and more powerful. Sensors 20 years ago, there were lots and lots of them. They were cumbersome, they were hard to use, they gave you 3D data. Leica this year announced this device, which that's the prototype. It's going to be much smaller, but basically the same set of sensors that are on the autonomous cars Google is playing with can be now worn on your back and on a backpack. So one could wander through where, in fact, will be tomorrow, the historic center, and in real time gather a three-dimensional, highly accurate model. These sensors are also being deployed in drones, in toy helicopters, in all over. So our ability to capture the world in 3D has changed dramatically in 30 years, and this provides many, many new possibilities. Our ability to see in 3D in places we couldn't see has also changed. This is Wolfgang Neubauer's team at Stonehenge 2 years ago. But sensors that used to be very inaccurate and slow, now he's dragging with tractors across fields and gathering vast volumes of subsurface data. And this has enabled all sorts of new discoveries at Stonehenge. And what's happening below the surface with ground-penetrating radar and magnetometers. I understand that this institute we're in today is also an expert in some of these technologies. So in 30 years, we've gone from maybe able to get 100 points per second, sometimes 1 point per second, with sensors 30 years ago, to in the era when we were working on Virtual Cairo and trying to model and document, to today 100,000, and some of the sensors are doing 1 million 3D measurements a second. In 30 years, photogrammetry has also grown by leaps and bounds. So 30 years ago, photogrammetry involved sitting, looking through a pair of stereo images with all sorts of equipment. It was based on technology that began in France in 1849, but today, and I'll show you a little video in a second which will illustrate how fast and easy it is to do photogrammetry even with a phone. Most of the work is based on Professor Mark Polyphys. He was a student at Leuven in Belgium, where I'm an adjunct faculty member, but this was his PhD thesis. This technology is 15 years old, but what was a PhD thesis then is now being integrated by Google into Project Tango, into many devices. But he took a video camera, waved it around, captured single viewpoints. From those single viewpoints, was able to gather three-dimensional data. So he had completely automated what used to be that big, huge box with somebody looking through a screen and clicking points. And so this research, which is 15 years old now, or more, is now being completely automated and built into the next generation of devices. And in the end, I'll throw a texture on it. Yeah. So no scanner was involved, just a camera. In this case, it was a video camera in the early prototype. In 30 years, panoramic imaging, actually this is even more than 30 years ago, Michael Neymark, a media artist, had this project funded where he attached a film camera on a car and drove through the streets of Aspen, Colorado, In the United States, there used to be a senator who would give awards for the biggest waste of public money, and this project got that prize. It took 30 years for Google to basically duplicate it with a digital camera and a digital sensor. The Google Street View, which many of you have probably used, where you can see through cities, is the result of Michael's project that was considered a giant waste of public money. And at UNESCO, we partnered with Google and even put the camera on bicycles and went through many, many heritage sites. So in Google Street View, you can visit many of the World Heritage Sites. In 30 years, 3D computing and processing power has gone from a rack of silicon graphics, Onyxes, or infinite realities costing $1 million to the same amount of compute power, again, is in this little handheld device. So orders of magnitude of difference in cost and computability. In 30 years, we've gone from virtual reality headsets, which cost over $100,000 and require giant cables, based on, again, technology from the 1830s where you had, basically, this is Google's cardboard in 1832 with a little wooden bracket and 2 images. That's basically what a lot of these virtual reality headsets are. But it's taken us 100 years and then another 30 years, and here many, many people wearing Oculus Rifts, oblivious to the fact that their hero, Mark Zuckerberg, is walking by them because they're lost in their little virtual world. In 30 years, visualization has gone from sort of wonderfully rendered movies that could be produced, things like Nazar showed you with Virtual Cairo, to fully interactive exhibits where you can wander around and see. And again, I'll show you a video of this in a second. And even in 3D physical objects, we've gone from basically almost impossible to print something in 3D on the desktop 30 years ago. There were the first devices, but they were very, very expensive, to today, these desktop 3D printers. Let me show you a video of, this is from a summit that I led a year ago in San Francisco, but it shows many of the technologies. It goes very quickly, so. Underwater scanning, aerial photogrammetry, laser scanning, scanning with cars. This is San Francisco, all in 3D. Real-time processing of that 3D data. This is a site in India. So this is immersive virtual reality. Predecessor of Pokemon Go, not very good. This is the Magao Caves in China in a giant interactive exhibit. This is a mummy in Sweden at one of the museums there. So very quick, I know I'm going quickly, but wanted to give you a sort of a sample of how far technology has come in 30 years. Digital heritage technology today, it's a vast, vast range of tools. I'm sure many of you are experts in many of these tools collectively or individually, but I think it's the collective power of all of these different devices when you bring them together that's going to enable this next generation of virtual Kairos. So let's step back in time and take a very quick look at Virtual Cairo. Tale of two cities, San Francisco, Bay Area, and Cairo. So Virtual Cairo was done by Nazar, but but from the Bay Area. And at Berkeley, there was a 3D model of San Francisco, of the Bay Area, and a simulation lab that was really, in many ways, the basis for many of these virtual recreations of cities. So we had that, and then we had Nizar, who had built his own virtual model, which was on his shelf for many years, probably is still in his office on the shelf, I would guess. But a wonderful, very evocative clay image. And so the question was, how do you take those physical technologies and bring them into the virtual world? And it was hard at the time. There was a student at Berkeley, Paul de Bebek, who went on to make the Matrix and more recently made a 3D digital model of President Obama's head. But developed technologies to basically build rendered 3D models from still photographs, very similar to the work I showed you, the photogrammetric examples. And at the same time, laser scanners were just in their infancy. So all of that technology came together due to time and resource, and as Nazar explained, giant computational challenges though. Virtual Cairo, I think, its greatest strength wasn't in the technology, but was in the story, in the history, in the narration. So let me talk about some of the challenges and opportunities of using these digital technologies. We have many needs, lots of different expertise, many different objectives. But the challenge with the digital tools really isn't the technology, it's more about the whys. Why are you capturing? Why are you digitizing something? For whom are you doing it? Who is your audience? What exactly do you want to digitize? Do you want to digitize the pyramid as it was thousands of years ago, or do you want to digitize it as it is today? And those are vastly different digital models. Can this effort be sustainable? In digital technologies and heritage, I'd like to group them in three categories. They're the input technologies, those are the digitization. They're the processing or the compute technologies, what the heritage folks would call conservation technologies. And then there are the digital output or creation technologies, what a conservative might call dissemination technologies. And they range from scanners and a lot of the devices I showed you to things I didn't show as much, but a lot of the finite element and analysis tools to all of the multimedia and VR and other tools. And these, just a quick example of, so in 1999 we did a project in Rome. We did it in the old-fashioned analog way. We took measurements, we hand drew it, it was rendered. We did it in the digital way, at large scale with laser scanners, finite element tools, virtual reality models even then. We did it at small scale, details, again the same process. But whenever there's a digital project, there's always the getting the data into the machine, processing it and getting it out. And those technologies have been quite slow and cumbersome and time consuming over the years. They're getting better, they still aren't perfect. Second challenge with the digital, the longevity of what you're doing. So your monuments in Egypt, like the pyramids, like Historic Cairo, and others have lasted thousands of years. Paper and wood, our drawings last hundreds of years. The digital devices that you record things on last decades. A CD-ROM has a 30-year lifespan, maybe. A hard disk drive, even less. Computer chip, if you want to store all your family's photos on a device. If you don't refresh that data, the memory eventually will lose its magnetic signal and your data will slowly vanish. And then how you record that data, the encoding, the format that you save your VR model in, your 3D game in, lasts in the single digits. So although digital technology shows great promise, there are also huge challenges. So there are many, many wonderful digital projects that I've seen come and go over the years that have been built, virtual models, virtual games, but unless they're maintained and used, they tend to go away with time, and the person who created them, the person who has the data set, isn't there to keep it. So some had argued that we could digitally, the Scottish 10 project, SciArc and others, that we could digitally record and document all of our heritage, but I don't think that's enough, because if you digitally capture it, it's not going to be around unless someone is actively using and processing the data. So I'll come back to that, but the key is somebody to actively use and process, and get to that and sort of some conclusions. But you know, what should we capture and why? A project I helped lead a number of years ago here in Cairo. Ramses needed to move. He moved, as some of you may know, many years ago from the outskirts to one of the central squares, and he couldn't be disassembled and laid flat because there were iron bars that had rusted and so on. So the question became how to digitize him to build a cradle to move him. So we brought in a team. The digital lesson here, though, was that at the early stage of the project, it wasn't decided at what resolution and what accuracy Ramses was needed. And so we flew in a team and equipment to do it, but with an accuracy of a centimeter. And in the end, they wanted accuracy of a millimeter, but we'd flown in the wrong equipment. So even in choosing digital technology, one has to be very aware of your purpose. So that's an accurate model of the Sphinx, but it's not the Sphinx that we would think of. It's the cheap copy in Las Vegas. So again, without a provenance and a source of our data and understanding where it is and when and what in history, accurate digital data is garbage. This is another example. So UNESCO, we built a 3D data set of all of the World Heritage Sites. I was in Chavin in Peru, and we noticed when we went on Google Earth to look at our data that there seemed to be a problem. Where we put the data from UNESCO was here, and you see a few little dots of people putting data, but look at all of this data here, and it says Chavin, 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 Chavin. So why is Google Earth showing Chavin 5 miles away in a different valley? The problem, and here somebody for their photo even says Chavin, GPS located. So you think it might be accurate. Well, it's not. It's way, way off. And I know it's off because, again, we bought satellite time and we very accurately positioned and surveyed Chavin. But the problem in digital data is people tend to be of a herd mentality. Once someone puts something in wrong digitally, many people don't check and they just keep putting data in the wrong place. And I mean, this happens, this is part of the digital culture and revolution we're in, but you know, people spread rumors on the internet and they explode and people believe them. People put data up incorrectly, even in the world of heritage and history, and people believe that it's accurate. And so we have to take everything with a grain of salt. There are also challenges of who owns the data. In reliability, I talked a little bit, but there are really 5 categories of problems with digital data. Challenges of the artifact, your device, the instrument you recruit, you use, environmental conditions on the day you record, human error, provenance. So, in conclusion, I want to talk a little bit about, I think, some possibilities and some futures, and possibility of the crowd and the cloud. And just as